At brunch, my daughter-in-law said, "We've decided not to invite you for Christmas." I just nodded. My name is Mary Beth Ellison, 71 years old. I live alone in Briarwood Hollow, a quiet little town where the snow falls thicker than memory. If you're listening to this on a cold evening in a kitchen filled only with the ticking of a clock and a teapot that's just run dry, then maybe we're not that far apart. I used to be called Mom, Grandma, the woman who never forgot a single birthday, who showed up for every holiday. But this year, for the first time, I wasn't invited to Christmas. Not because I did something wrong, just because maybe I'd been around too long enough to become part of the background no one notices anymore. I'm not telling this story to complain. I'm telling it because maybe somewhere out there there's someone else who's waited for a call that never came, an empty chair at the table, a gift left unopened, and a mother who once thought, if I'm good enough, they'll still need me. If that's you, stay with me a while. I'll tell you about the winters I've made it through, and how I learned one of the simplest, hardest lessons of all: to save a seat for myself. That winter, it all began on a cold Sunday morning at the cafe I always went to when I overheard the sentence that changed everything. "We've talked it over. You won't be coming for Christmas this year." Hallie said it plainly. I nodded, as if it wasn't even worth setting my coffee down for. Fern and Hearth looked just like it always did on the Sunday before Christmas, just busy enough, cozy in that careful kind of way. Red brick walls, dressed in dried wreaths, tiny string lights, glowing faintly, more decorative than warm. The chairs were still upholstered in that soft cream leather edges, a bit worn, but always clean. I picked my usual spot by the window, where I could see the town's Christmas tree, in front of the post office, still just 2 faded ribbons and a dull silver star, like every year. I got there early and ordered a cappuccino, same as always. Ellie, the young waitress with the dimple on her left cheek, didn't need to ask. "Still going with the strawberry muffin, ma'am?" She smiled, setting the tray down like I was a fixture on her shift. I nodded. "Thank you, dear." Her smile was the only thing that made me feel like I hadn't completely disappeared on mornings like this. Hallie showed up first, always on time, as precise as a minute hand. Travis followed a bit slow, like he hadn't fully stepped out of last night. He sat before even unwrapping his scarf. Hallie pulled her chair out with intent, back straight, beige, turtleneck hands, resting on the menu she never actually looked at. I didn't bother asking how anyone was. These kinds of mornings weren't meant for catching up, just arriving, ordering, announcing, and leaving. Hallie didn't wait for the drinks to land. She said it without hesitation. "We've talked it over. You won't be coming for Christmas this year." I nodded again, as if I'd already said it to myself before she did. Travis glanced at me once, then stared down at the table. Hallie kept going like she needed to finish the explanation to make it official. "Becca's at that age where she needs more privacy. We thought we'd try something simpler this year, just us and the kids. Jonah's still young, so he won't notice. But Becca..." I nodded again, not in agreement, just to end the sentence. No one touched my muffin. It sat there still warm beside a cappuccino, already half gone. I stood up. "I assume I'll be paying for myself." I pulled out my wallet and placed the exact change beside the plate, careful not to let a single coin slip. Ellie returned just then, carrying a tray of tiny gingerbread cookies. "For you to take home, they're homemade," she said. I looked at her. This time, I didn't nod. "I don't need it. Thank you." No one stopped me. No one reached out. No awkward glances. I left the cafe like someone stepping out of a play that had no more lines for them. And I wasn't finished with this chapter. I had only just begun. The air outside was so cold, it stung my skin. The sidewalk had already been salted, but patches of dull gray ice still shimmered underfoot, like wounds that hadn't quite healed. I walked slowly, not because my legs were weak, but because there was nothing to rush toward. People brushed past with purpose. Everyone seemed on their way, somewhere warm. The post office, the bakery, maybe just back home. Not me. I walked toward the hill where my car was parked. I hadn't walked this stretch, in December, for 12 years, not since Becca was in preschool, and I'd pick her up twice a week. Back then, Hallie had seemed grateful. She used to call me the one who kept tradition alive. I still remember her handing me a thermos of cocoa once and saying, "Thanks for coming early, Mom." Well, I came early today too, only this time no one needed me. They came to make a decision. I came to receive it. At the corner was the used bookstore I used to take Travis to when he was in 3rd grade. He had stared at the ceiling map so long, I had to come back and buy it. Now, taped to the front window, 60% off, moving soon. Everything's pulling away from the places I once called mine. I stopped and looked inside. Not because I needed a book, but because I needed a reason not to keep walking. Something inside me had split a thread that once tied me to the image of the mother, the grandmother who always showed up. It had snapped, and no one even looked back. There's something strange about realizing your presence no longer fits into anyone's plans. It doesn't hurt sharply. It's just hollow, like stepping into a familiar room where everything's still in place except you. I reached into my bag and pulled out my keys. My hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the blood in me still trying to find its rhythm after Hallie's coldness. She didn't yell. She didn't insult me. She just didn't invite me for Christmas. And somehow, that was enough to change the season entirely. Travis didn't defend me. He just sat there like a chair that had always belonged to that corner. Maybe he thought silence was keeping the peace. Maybe he thought I was too strong to be hurt. No one stopped to wonder if I had feelings of my own. I've always been the one to give up my seat, to cut the cake with more frosting, to roast the turkey without onions because Hallie's allergic. I was always the easy one, until they decided I didn't need to be considered at all. I heard the wind chime from behind me, someone opening the cafe door. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted out. I didn't turn back. I didn't walk in. And in that moment, as I stood by my car, one sentence came to me clear, as if someone had whispered it in my ear. No one remembers I was the one who built the first home they ever lived in. On the icy curb, I walked slowly. Not because my legs were tired, but because nothing waited for me on the other side. I returned home to a quiet apartment where the floorboards creaked and the gift box on the attic shelf still waited to be opened, as if this year would be no different than the last. That box, through all those winters, had become part of a ritual I'd never thought to question. I was never formally invited to Christmas. Not once. But every year, I prepared gifts a month in advance. No one ever said, "Mom, we'd love for you to come." No one asked, "What dish would you like for the holiday dinner?" Still, I made a list. Year after year, each gift was carefully wrapped in snow-patterned paper, tied with silver or red ribbons, depending on my mood. Becca liked soft packages, so I picked scarves. Jonah loved Legos. I searched high and low for the police set he wanted. Hallie always got something for the kitchen, maybe a juicer, maybe a set of mugs with laser-etched names. As for Travis, he rarely opened his gift in front of me, but every year I left him a dark wool scarf with a Home Depot gift card tucked in a separate envelope. No one ever said thank you, but I didn't wait for it. Back then I thought, if I remembered someone, that was enough. I never thought about being invited. I just believed I was supposed to be there. Every year, at the start of December, I'd reach for the attic ladder, step by step, to pull down the Christmas box, even if I knew I might not use anything inside. Maybe I'd grown used to preparing, as if not doing so would make it even easier for them to forget I existed. I opened the box. Faded newspaper wrapped each ornament. Some had lost their shimmer. Some had tiny cracks, like time had brushed them gently on its way through. I wiped them down with a dry cloth. The scent of dried pine, from the sprigs buried at the bottom, drifted up, bringing back older winters. When I lived with Travis's father, we used to get a real tree taller than 6 feet. Every morning, sap would puddle on the floor beneath it. Back then, Hallie called me the keeper of the season. The year Travis lost his construction job, I didn't ask questions. I just called the bank and transferred $5,000 into his account. No name, no message, and it was never mentioned again. But I knew it helped That same month, Becca had new shoes, and Travis didn't have to deliver at night anymore. When Hallie had Jonah, she came home for 3 days before calling me. "Could you maybe cook something for us?" I made oatmeal with mashed apples and dropped it off every evening, left it in the fridge, never stepped inside. They said they needed space. I nodded. I've lived with those nods for so long, I can't remember the last time someone asked me if I wanted anything. I think I was programmed to stay just on the edge as long as I didn't take up too much room. That afternoon, I walked to Page and Pine, the bookstore, hoping to find something to gift Becca. She once wrote me a little card when she was 6. "Grandma, don't forget the peppermint candy." I love it. I kept that card in my wallet for nearly 2 years. Now, I'm not sure she even remembers what peppermint smells like. The shop was quiet. That mix of pine wood and fresh paper in the air. There was a tiny bell hanging on the window, the kind of sound that makes you feel like nothing in the world needs to hurry. Evelyn, the owner, still wore that oversized scarf. Her eyes squinted into a smile when she saw me. "Looking for a gift for your grandkids again?" "Miss Mary Beth?" I nodded, then stopped. "No, not today." I hadn't picked anything yet. I stood quietly for a while, scanning the children's section. Hardcover books lined up reindeer, Santa gingerbread men, all in neat rows. There was one I used to read to Travis nearly 40 years ago, The Night Before Christmas. I don't remember much of the story, just that he used to yawn when I got to the flying reindeer part. He liked real things. I, on the other hand, wanted to hold on to whatever magic winter had left. Evelyn handed me a cup of tea, tilted her head. "You know we're looking for a storyteller on Saturday mornings. The kids come in pajamas, sit under the tree. It's a joy." I smiled faintly. "You think I could be a storyteller? You're the most natural one." "I know," she said, without missing a beat. "The way you speak, slow and soft, makes people want to listen." I didn't answer. Just reached for a book with a deep blue cover. Reading stories to children. That's something I used to do every night all those early years of being a mother. But no one ever asked me to do it, outside of family. I sat down on the cushioned bench by the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, light, soft, silent. Inside, the sound of pages turning and a faint chime became a gentle backdrop. And I realized there is a world where I don't have to earn my place with gifts, silence, or sacrifice. It's just, I'd never dared to step into it. When I left the shop, I carried nothing. Evelyn handed me a card with the storytelling schedule. I slipped it into my coat pocket. No promises, no refusals. I walked home. The wind had turned colder than it was that morning. The apartment was dark, no one waiting. On the table, last year's gift box still sat untouched. I opened my notebook. The page was blank. No appointments. No shopping list like all the years before. I looked at my fingers, lined with soft creases. No longer quick, but steady enough to write one thing. Just one line. In neat, deliberate strokes. This year, I'll try bringing nothing and see who still invites me. I sat there for a long time. Maybe it's time to take inventory of everything I've given and finally ask what's left for me. I used to be an accountant. I remember every dollar. But I never used that skill to count what I'd given away, not until this week. I printed the bank statements and laid them out on the old dining table, which also serves as my desk now. The maple wood is scratched in places from the time I dropped a plate last year. A red pen sat next to my tablet, a cup of coffee cold since morning. I wasn't doing this to blame anyone. I just needed to know how much of my life I'd poured into others, without ever being named. First line, $200 a month for internet for 4 straight years. Since Hallie said, "We'll cover it," Mom, just keep the account in your name so it doesn't get shut off. I don't remember if I nodded or just stayed quiet. Either way, the total came to $9,600. Next home repairs the year Travis's basement flooded. I held the insurance, fronted the cost, $14,500. Then the down payment to help Hallie with her car, $6,200. Summer classes for Becca, $1,800. Emergency hospital bill when Jonah had a high fever 2 winters ago. $3,200. And that's not even counting the meals, the toys, the electric bills I quietly paid. I put it all into a simple spreadsheet, rows for each item, columns for each year. The final number, $276,800. I stared at that number for a long time, not because of how much it was, but because I'd never realized how much I could give and still survive. Not comfortably, just survive without feeling like I had anything left. My phone sat silent on the table. I pressed the button and left a voicemail for the law office I'd used for years. I need to stop all recurring transfers, and I'd like to schedule a review of my authorizations. My hand didn't shake. It was just quiet. That afternoon, I stopped by Maple Bean, a small diner that still makes toast crisp on both sides, like they did when I worked with the retired accountants' circle. The tables are round in steel. The waitress still remembers I prefer peppermint tea over coffee. Silas was already there, more silver in his hair than last time, but his back still straight. We'd worked together on a few fundraisers after retirement. "Heard you're thinking about revisiting your will," he said as I sat down. I nodded. "I think it's time to redefine what my share really means." Silas didn't press. He just pulled out his notebook and handed me a page. "I usually write this down for retirees, but I think it fits you better. They didn't invite you because you weren't worthy. They didn't invite you because they assumed you'd always walk in anyway." I let out a short laugh. Maybe I did walk in too often. We sat a while longer, not saying much. Sometimes retired people know how to care without intruding. Silas ordered a second iced lemon tea. I didn't get anything else. "I used to think that if I didn't help, they'd struggle," I said, as the soft diner lights began to dim with the late afternoon. Silas didn't answer. He just nodded slowly. I left before it got completely dark. The snow hadn't started again. I walked a short stretch down Main Street. Christmas lights had already been wrapped around the lampposts. At the bank nearby, an older woman sat at the counter counting coins from a small fabric pouch. Her gloves were fraying. The plastic cup beside her had a chipped rim. She didn't look at anyone, just focused on her task. I stood and watched for a moment, not out of pity, but because I understood her. Maybe she too had once been the one who always prepared, always sacrificed, always said yes. And then one day, no one needed that anymore. No one pushed her away. They just didn't save her a seat. Back home, I opened my file cabinet. 3 savings folders. I added a 4th for myself, in any situation. I moved $12,000 into it. No one knew. No one needed to. Just me. And for the first time, I didn't wait for anyone's permission. Night fell slowly. The wind hummed lightly against the windows, but the old desk lamp kept the room warm. I switched it on, a soft yellow glow brushed across the wrinkles on my hands, and the bill with my name printed at the top. For the first time in years, I crossed my own name off the family ledger. I closed the folder and looked out at the fog-covered window. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to stay in a place where people only kept me because I was familiar. I didn't leave a goodbye note. No parting words. I just took back the keys to the cabin, the one that used to be mine, and drove off as the snow began to blanket the edge of the road. The cabin sits by Larch Pine Lake, where the pine forest runs thicker than memory. It's about a 20-minute drive from town, but I drove slowly, as if my car, too, didn't want to disturb the quiet waiting ahead. When I pushed the door open, the scent of old wood and last year's fire rose up around me. Nothing had changed, because no one had come since last winter. I wondered if Hallie remembered this place was where we celebrated Becca's first Thanksgiving. Probably not. She prefers homes with strong Wi-Fi now, and larger driveways. I lit the fireplace slowly, with old newspaper and the dry wood stacked in the crate. The fire caught with a quiet crackle, like a breath. The wooden floor creaked under my heels in a way that felt like greeting. I set my backpack on the worn-out sofa, then walked into the bedroom and pulled back the curtains. The light came in dim and soft. No one knew I was here. not out of anger, but because, for the first time, I wanted to choose a place for myself without explanation, without asking permission. That afternoon, I walked the dirt trail toward the end-of-season farmers market. The stalls were smaller now, heaters buzzing faintly under the counters. I bought a bag of golden apples and paused at the baked goods stand. The woman beside me looked up, and I recognized her. Colleen Meyer. We went to high school together, once exchanged letters when she moved north. She'd been living alone since her husband passed. I heard once that her son tried to sell her house without asking. She took him to court and kept her cabin. Colleen saw me right away. "Mary Beth." I nodded. She held up a bag of apple pastries. "These still taste the same. And honestly, we don't need anything new at our age, do we?" We each bought a portion and walked back to the cabin. I made hot cocoa. She sat on the wooden steps, hands resting on her knees, like someone who used to garden every day. I poured the cocoa into 2 brown ceramic mugs. My hands trembled a little from the steam. Colleen took hers without a word. We sat on opposite sides of the steps, backs against the doorway, facing the forest dusted in snow. No one mentioned children. No talk of letters unsent or calls that never came. No one asked why the other had ended up in a winter cabin this far out. Maybe at a certain age, being there is enough to understand. Explanations only make the ache sharper. Colleen looked out toward the lake, now covered in a thin sheet of ice. The evening light sliced across it like a quiet blade of orange. "I kept the cabin," she said, but I couldn't keep the silence. I turned toward her. She wasn't looking at me, just speaking into the wind. "I mean, you can live alone, but the absence of footsteps, you still hear it." I knew what she meant. There are nights when the heater kicks in, a harmless sound, but it echoes like someone whispering my name in a dream. Not because it's cold, but because it's no one's voice at all. We didn't speak for a while. The forest rustled gently, like distant waves from a far-off sea. I told Colleen about the cabin, that my husband built it himself, every stone in the foundation his choice. We camped here the first summer after our wedding. Travis learned to climb trees in the little woods behind this place. Once he fell and broke his arm. I screamed in the ER while they wrapped it. I thought I'd never forgive the cabin for letting him get hurt. But I came back. Every year. Every winter. Colleen laughed. Kids never take care of the things they didn't pay for. I smiled. Then we keep them. Not to hold it against them, but to hold on to what's left of ourselves. I wasn't sure if she understood what I meant, but I didn't need her to. That sentence was for me, a quiet vow from someone who once forgot her own worth. The sun dipped lower. Colleen stood waved. No promises to see each other again, but that wasn't needed. People who survive to this age, they know how to return when it matters. I gathered the mugs, folded the blanket, secured the windows. The wind outside picked up, but the fire inside still glowed. I hung my coat on the wooden hook by the door. A moment later, there was a knock. I opened it. It was Mr. Rourke, my neighbor from across the hill. He held a wax paper-wrapped tin of oatmeal cookies. Said nothing, just nodded. I nodded back and took them. "Welcome to the cold season," he said, turning to leave. I didn't call him back, but for the first time, I didn't feel like my heart was freezing with the air. I shut the cabin door from the inside. The fire hummed. And, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I never shared the address, but on a snowy morning, I saw a familiar SUV parked at the gate of the cabin. It was the same silver-gray car, high roof, fogged windows, the kind Hallie once said was perfect for kids and dogs. The license plate was still the same one Travis chose when he got his promotion in 2018. I stood by the window, teacup still warm in my hand. I didn't move closer. I didn't step back. I just stood still. They got out after a few minutes of hesitation. Hallie first, wearing a white coat, holding a gift box wrapped in red ribbon. Travis followed, his face unreadable beneath his knit hat. Becca wore a red hoodie, carrying something round made of pine leaves and tinsel. I opened the door just wide enough to invite them in, but I didn't step outside. I only said one simple sentence. "Come in." There's coffee. No hugs. No, why are you here? Or we've been so worried. I wasn't waiting for it. And they didn't pretend. Hallie set the box of cookies on the wooden table in the center of the room. Travis looked around like he was stepping into a place that had once been his, but now had a different lock. Becca stood quietly near the small tree I'd put together. No lights, just a few paper bows and dry pine cones from the backyard. I poured the tea. Didn't ask what they wanted. Hallie spoke first. Mom, I know it was sudden. I mean, you leaving. I didn't respond. Just set the teacup in front of her. I thought maybe you just needed space. But Becca really missed you. I turned to Becca. She said nothing, but placed her handmade wreath on the table, twisted wire bits of fabric, and 2 slightly uneven paper snowflakes. I reached out, touched it gently, then nodded. Travis sat down on the wooden chair near the fireplace. It had been a long time since I'd seen him sit lower than me. He looked at me for a moment, then said softly, "You leaving made me feel lost." I sat across from him, fingers curled around my tea. The only sound was the quiet popping of the firewood. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. No one said anything when I was there, I said. I poured more tea for myself. Now I'm quiet, and that's the problem. No one argued. No one defended themselves. Hallie shifted forward. I brought gingerbread. Becca picked the flavor you like. I nodded, but didn't open the box. Didn't say thank you either. I've lived long enough to know not everything brought to your doorstep is love. The soft light from the string bulbs wrapped around the bookshelf made the room look warm, but nothing could warm the space between me and them. I picked up Becca's wreath and hung it on the bedroom door, on the same nail I'd kept from past Christmases. She watched me, didn't say a word, just pressed her lips together the way her mother does when she's trying not to cry. I sat back down. Travis glanced toward the window. Mom, are you coming back? I shook my head. I understand, he whispered. It's all so empty. I looked at him, this boy who used to fear the dark, who clung to me on Christmas night whenever ice slid off the roof. Now, he had a house, a wife, 2 kids, and still didn't know how much space a mother truly needs. I didn't blame him, didn't forgive either. I just said softly, like the wind was speaking for me, I'm not angry. I just don't live by instructions anymore. Hallie paused, as if something caught in her throat but wouldn't come out. Becca sat still, hands clasped tightly in her lap. No one said anything else, and I didn't want them to. Silence, on a thick winter day, was a complete enough answer. When they stood up, I didn't walk them to the door. I stayed where I was, hand resting on the table's edge. I heard the crunch of snow beneath their shoes, the door of the car opening then closing again. But before the SUV pulled away, I looked out the window. I saw Becca turn her head. She smiled a smile that looked just like mine when I was 11. I just didn't know if that smile was meant for me. But either way, that visit closed a door and opened a path I chose for myself. I used to be called Mom, wife, Grandma, but no one ever asked me, what do I want to be called that morning I walked across the stone path, covered in a thin glaze of ice arms, holding a basket of cinnamon cookies and a worn book with folded corners. Snow was falling lightly, little white flakes resting on the tips of my shoes, collecting at the hem of my deep gray coat. The scarf around my neck, hand-knit, still carrying the scent of baby shampoo, was the one Becca gave me 2 years ago. Paige and Pine sat at the corner of town, where everything seemed to move slower as the year wound down. The door opened with a soft chime. Evelyn looked up from the counter. Mary Beth, she called, waving like I was someone she'd been waiting for. No one here knew how many dinners I had spent, in silence, seated at nameless tables. Here I was, simply the woman who brought cookies and a few stories. The reading nook was right by the window, where soft, winter light poured in through fogged glass. The children sat in a circle on the rug, wearing bare-eared headbands, tiny hands clutching steaming cups of cocoa. I leaned down carefully, placed the cookie bag on the wooden side table, and opened the book. The story I told that day had no princess, no dragon, just an old woman living alone in a wooden cabin deep in the forest. She used to have a big family, but over time, one by one, they forgot how to knock. The children listened with wide, quiet eyes. They didn't interrupt. They didn't ask why. They didn't need to know the woman's real name. They just needed to know she was still there lighting her fire, telling stories to the squirrels, the wind, and the pine trees. I spoke in an even tone, no theatrics, no exaggeration, just as if I were reading to myself. When the story ended, I passed out the cookies. No one asked, "Who do you live with?" or "How old are your grandkids?" They just asked, "Will you tell another one?" And I nodded as if I still had something worth holding on to. I stayed for a while after the children had gone. Evelyn came over, gently, set a business card on the table. "We're looking for someone to tell stories more regularly," she said. "I know you're not one for titles, but if you'd like, I'll print a small sign. Storyteller in residence. Mary Beth Ellison." I laughed, just a little. Not because of the title, but because for the first time, I saw my name written without any roles attached to it. That afternoon, I wandered the neighborhood. The breeze was cold, just enough to remind me that winter here doesn't coddle, but gentle enough that I didn't feel rushed. I paused outside the old flower shop. Didn't buy anything, just breathed in the scent. Back when I was someone's wife, I was too busy to notice the difference between the smell of tulips and lilies. Now I know. The same way I'm learning to tell the difference between being loved and simply being needed. When I got back to the cabin, I set the empty basket on the wooden table, took off my coat and relit the fire. The wreath Becca had made was still on the table, dry now, but not broken. I hung it on the window, not for anyone to see, but for me. So I'd remember I was still holding on to something. That evening, I opened my old notebook, the one that had followed me since I moved here. No expenses listed, no instructions left behind, just a few short lines, like footprints after a snowfall. I wrote one more. Today, a little girl said, "I'd tell stories like magic." Then I paused. Not because the words were beautiful, but because I once believed I had nothing left in me that could be called magic. Now I know some magic doesn't come from anywhere grand. It appears the moment you stop trying to be someone else. The next morning, I walked back to the bookstore, not because anyone asked me to, but because I liked the smell of fresh paper and the way people greet each other with real eyes. I signed the New Year card Evelyn had pinned by the shop door. I didn't add anything else. No grandma, no mom, no Mrs., just from Mary Beth. Nothing more. I used to be called many things. Wife, mom, grandma, the babysitter, the one who made dinner, the one who remembered every birthday, even when no one remembered mine. I never complained. I just thought maybe I was born to keep the fire going, to be the background that helped others get through the cold seasons without feeling the chill. I used to believe that love meant preparing everything quietly without being asked, like the Christmas tree that stood tall before the kids even opened their eyes, like the pie already in the oven, though no one asked for it, like the money I pulled from my retirement fund and handed to Travis when he lost his job. No invoice, no receipt, just a mother doing what mothers do. I got used to not being invited, but still showing up, bringing everything with me, the food, the gifts, my quiet presence. I thought that was normal, as if my worth was measured by what I could bring, not by whether anyone still wanted me there. And then, one day I stopped being called, not because I died, but because I was no longer useful. I remember the last time I nodded at brunch. No protest, no frown, just a nod, as if someone had cut the string that tied me to the word family, and I just sat there still. That day, I realized some things disappear without making a sound, like when you rise from the table and no one looks up to watch you leave. As an accountant, I always knew how to calculate, but I never used that skill to add up what I'd given to my family. Over $270,000 without a single thank you. Not out of bitterness, just the plain, quiet truth I had to face. Someone once told me kindness may not always be appreciated, but dignity should never be lost. I moved to the old cabin, not out of anger, but to begin again. I swept the porch, stacked the firewood, hung the faded curtains back in place. I sat with Colleen, a woman whose children once betrayed her, a woman who thought she'd become a shadow. But together, we lit the fire, sipped warm cocoa, and understood this simple thing: we didn't need to wait for someone else to strike the match anymore. When Travis and Hallie showed up, I wasn't angry. I just wasn't afraid of being misunderstood anymore. I didn't explain. I didn't ask to be forgiven. I simply sat and poured the tea. And when Becca handed me the little wreath she'd made herself, I held on to it. Not because she was my granddaughter, but because in her eyes, I saw the child I once was, waiting for someone to place a hand on her shoulder and say, "You are enough. You have always been enough." I tell stories to the children at Page and Pine, not because I need recognition, but because I still have something to give, this time not out of duty, but because I choose to. And I tell those stories under my own name. No titles, no roles, just Mary Beth. And if you're hearing this story, maybe from a quiet living room or on your drive home, I want to ask you something. When was the last time you did something just for you, like an old quilt that kept the whole house warm through winter? Until one day, when no one felt cold anymore, they folded it up and forgot how much they once relied on it. But what if that quilt learned to clean itself, to soak up the sun, to wrap itself around its own shoulders? Maybe then it would feel warmer than anyone ever imagined. Maybe you were once that quilt. And if this story touches your heart, think of someone who once loved you quietly. Maybe your grandmother, your mother, or the neighbor who baked you cookies that first Christmas in town. Don't wait for another winter to realize this. Some hearts only stay when you remember to hold on to them.